So then, is there any room to enchant investors?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's what that process is. I mean, you enchant an investor by being likable and trustworthy and a great product. That's all it takes. I mean, that's all it takes. That's a lot. But fundamentally, that's it. And investment is an emotional decision. It is not an unemotional objective decision. So if you believe that people invest in you because of your financial forecast and your spreadsheet and the internal rate of return, you are seriously deluding yourself. None of that counts, because we know that your financial forecast is total BS.
Right.
I mean, you're making it up. You're making it up so that in 5 years you're doing $100 million a year, because if you put anything less than that, you're not interesting. If you make any more than that, then you look like you're delusional. So everybody says they're going to do 50 to 100 million in 5 years. And whether it's shrimp farming or a new kind of phone, everybody says that. Okay, so we know you're making up the numbers, and now you should know that we know you're making up the numbers. So nobody does an internal rate of return and crank spreadsheets. They either like you and they think you're hot. I mean, to go back to the dating analogy, imagine if when you met a woman, you started off by saying, my name is Guy, and I was born in Honolulu, and I went to this elementary school, and then I went to this private school called Iolani, and that's not the school that Barack Obama went to, and I was really into, football and soccer, and then I went to Stanford, and I majored in pre-med, but then, really, I decided I couldn't cut it, so I found the easiest major I could, psych, and my parents are Asian American, obviously, so I went to law school, but I couldn't stand law schools. I quit law school after 2 weeks, and I went back to Hawaii, then I went back to the mainland. I entered the MBA program at UCLA, and while I was at UCLA, I started working in a jewelry company, and when I left the jewelry company as a vice president of sales and marketing, I went to Apple. If you tell that kind of story, and if you think you're gonna get a date with that girl, man, you're seriously deluding yourself. That girl is making a decision. You are hot or not, and you have about 30 seconds to accomplish that. So you better get on it, pal.
Okay, great advice from a VC. Okay, you talked about defaulting to yes.
Yes.
At what point does a person say no? Should a person say no?
Well, I'll tell you, and this is coming from 30 years of defaulting to yes. I could count on one hand the number of times that people ask me unreasonable things. And I would say, generally speaking, that people are good until proven bad. And you should keep that in your heart. If you go through life believing that people are good until proven bad, as opposed to bad until proven good, you'll be a much happier, more enchanting, and more successful person. And so I'm scratching my head trying to figure out, times I've been screwed, and I just I cannot come up with any. Yes, it happens, but arguably, if you default to yes and someone asks you something totally unreasonable, that person is probably not worth enchanting. So you should just blow that person off. I mean, I'm not saying, everybody has to love you. Believe me, not everybody loves me. At some point, actually, what makes some people enchanting is that they don't expect everybody to love them. That's what makes them interesting. If you just are this piece of jello that people push around, that's not that interesting and enchanting. So I would say don't sweat it. I mean, based on my experiences.
Okay, and that's coming from a VC who get requests all the time.
Yes, all the time, every day of my life.
I was reading through the book, and I kind of noticed how certain, it seems like certain people have certain ways of enchantment.
Yeah.
Because you're kind of corresponding enchantment with how to do sales, right? Because that's what essentially it is, right? So, you're a sales guy because you're in a jewelry business. What was your way of enchanting?
I use the Macintosh example where we explain 3 reasons and let people pick one, right?
Yeah.
And that's basically my approach. That I try to understand where the other person is coming from, sometimes in advance and sometimes in real time. But I believe that, if first of all, if you start off at least as likable and trustworthy, so that you don't get the door slammed in your face, then you will probably have time to figure out what the person's hot buttons are. On the other hand, if you're not likable and trustworthy as a basis to start, you will not be given that time. So that's why it's so important to be likable and trustworthy. So if you're likable and trustworthy and you have figured out that this is a game of hot or not eHarmony, preparation is better, but you can probably pull it off. And you know what? Today with the internet, preparation is much easier. So theoretically, when you go to a meeting with a person, you can know a lot about that person. At one level, the very simplistic level, you just type in his name into Google and you figure out, of course, I'll tell you a way to get around that. So you type in the name and you'll find the person, probably, and you go to his website, you find all this kind of stuff about him. But I used to advise a company called Spokeo, Spokeo, and with Spokeo, you can type in a person's email address, and then it'll go and it'll search all the social media networks for customers who have registered with that email address. So instead of, if you typed in Mike Lee into Google, you're going to find about 25 million Mike Lees. But if you type in Mike Lee 65 at yahoo.com, because you know that's the real Mike Lee that you want, then Spokeo goes and it looks for all the Mike Lee 65 at yahoo.coms and figures out which social networks that person is in, and then it gives you the results. So you could see his Flickr feed, his Facebook account, his Twitter account, his LinkedIn account, his High Five account, all that. And so, from his Flickr account, you can get an idea that, he's always playing hockey, or he's always with his kids at a soccer game or something. Now, I would not open up the meeting by saying, I searched for you and I went to your Flickr feed and I see that you have 4 kids, 14 to 22. That might not be the great opening, because then you're going to look like this pervert who's like stalking him. But it would be good to know that, this person has 4 kids and they're into horseback riding. Somewhere along the line, you can just drop that little tidbit in. So yeah, do your research, but at the very least, be likable and trustworthy in the first 2 minutes.
Okay.
Okay?
Sounds good. Who should people enchant?
I'm sorry?
In the book, you mentioned that, there's a saying that, the nobodies are the new somebodies.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
Yes. So I believe that today, the way marketing works, it's not top down. It's not that you suck up to Wired and the Wall Street Journal and then they tell all the masses what to use. I think today, because of Facebook and Twitter, just the democratization of computers, that there are lots of people who you can reach who will try this, and if they try it and like it, they'll build up a critical mass, and then you can be successful without ever being covered by the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, or Wired. So if you think about Twitter was covered by all the publications after it became successful. It wasn't covered before to make it successful. So your goal is to plant many seeds, because nobodies, the people you can't identify, you never heard of, they are the new somebodies. And if you get enough of these nobodies to embrace you, your product is successful, they become somebodies, and you become somebodies. So this has major marketing ramifications. It means you don't focus solely on these great oracles in the sky, the A-listers.
Okay. Along with that, you mentioned something about, being a mensch, and that's something I've been hearing a lot recently.
Yeah.
Now, first, can you just explain what a mensch is?
Yeah. So mensch, it's a German term, although I use it in the Jewish sense. A mensch is a gentle man or gentle woman, completely trustworthy, has the other person's best interests at heart, kind, warm, and gentle. This kind of person. It's very hard to translate this word into English terminology. There are very few mensches in the world. A very visible mensch would be Nelson Mandela. I can't think of any other political mensches. And so that's what you should aspire to becoming this kind, gentle, trustworthy, likable person that has the other person's best interests at heart, that people would come to for advice and support.
So, I'm thinking it's really easy for someone who's, very well known to be a mensch. How does someone who's a nobody be a mensch?
Oh, it's actually quite the contrary. So the problem is when you become well known, you usually become well known because you're rich and famous. And I don't think there is a rich and famous mensch. Basically, I think that rich and money and fame corrupts you. And so pretty soon you start believing that, you need your entourage, and then you need special sky blue towels in the room of your hotel, and backstage you have special colored M&Ms, and you need special water that, Tibetan monks got for you. And you have this group of people who protect you from the rest of the world and all that. And so believe me, money is the enemy of menschness, and it's also the enemy of enchantment. It's much more likely that in most people's situation, let's say that there's a coach at your high school who's coached there for 25 years. Just changed kids' lives, took kids who were on the outer fringe and supported them and brought them into the team and, whatever. That's a mensch. Whereas, at an extreme, Charlie Sheen is not a mensch. He may be rich, he may be famous, he may be everything. He's not a mensch. So it's much more likely a teacher, a coach, somebody like that is a mensch.
Okay, that's great. There's some very practical tips in your book about being enchanting, and it has to do with obviously one you mentioned, the smile and handshake. Another one is write shorter emails.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Well, because by definition, I think most people get too much email, and when you get too much email, the thing that makes an email work is probably, first of all, the subject line. The subject line has to be very well. The best case is that somebody introduces you to the person who you respect. So if you don't have that, you have to have a compelling subject line, and then you have to have a compelling opening sentence. And going back to dating again, this is your pickup line. Your subject line and your first sentence has to work, because if it doesn't, you're digging yourself out of a hole. And basically an email should tell you in like 5 sentences who you are, what you want, and why the person should help you. And many emails that everybody gets, they're like pages and pages of crap that, again, starts from the time you were born and tells you this whole story, and nobody cares about your whole story. Just, cut to the chase. So like when I sent you an email, I basically said, what time are we on, right? I mean, I could have told you this is Guy Kawasaki and I'm really looking forward to this thing, and I really whatever and blah blah blah. Basically, I just wanted to know what time are we doing it and how long. Okay? And so now maybe I do this to a fault. You may be on the other side saying, geez, this guy is curt, and it's like there's no warm and fuzziness here. He just wants to know what freaking time we're starting, right? On the other hand, it probably made you able to answer this thing in about 5 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So I value your time too. So that's the key to email.